Welcome to this week's episode of the Deliberate Leader podcast. This week I'm joined by Dr. Rebecca Sutherns. Rebecca is an insightful and high-energy communicator and collaborative strategist, and she works across teams both in Canada but also globally to basically help them to unlock how to better articulate their strategy. Her latest area is all about reimagining, so reshaping strategy, reshaping ideals as an individual, but also reshaping ideals as an organization. So in this conversation, I'm really looking forward to exploring different areas with Rebecca insofar as strategy, deliberate leadership, and deliberate teams. Enjoy the conversation. Welcome to this week's episode of the Deliberate Leader podcast. I'm so lucky to be joined by Dr. Rebecca Sutherns. Rebecca, welcome.
Thanks so much. I appreciate being here.
It's so wonderful. I know we are very far away. You are all the way on the other side of the world. So I'm based in Melbourne, Australia. Happy to let people know. I know it's on the other side. Where are you exactly?
Absolutely. So the place I live is called Guelph, Ontario, Canada. It is 1 hour west of Toronto. And yeah, it is clearly the opposite side, complete opposite season, opposite time of day. But I love technology like this because I spend as much of my time with folks in your part of the world as with mine, I feel like. So that is a good thing.
Likewise. And obviously I'm in like very much customary summery wear here in Melbourne, and you're rugged up because it is getting cold where you are, but I appreciate it. We're in different time zones, but I'm so glad to be having a conversation with you today. We've known each other for a little while, doing similar things, but on different sides of the world. And I've really admired your work. And as I was thinking about bringing in guests that our deliberate leaders can hear from, and particularly the wisdom that comes with your work, I was like, people have to hear Rebecca's stuff. So I'm so pleased to have you on today. I know that, obviously before we hit record, we were having a little chat about some of the topics. And I know that there's so much that we could talk about. A lot of your work, Rebecca, from what I can see, is helping people to really figure out that next bit. When you go onto Rebecca's website, and we'll pop it into the show notes, but you've got some very specific categories there about reshaping your sector, redesigning your plan, reinventing your life. Are you happy to talk to us a little bit about, where that came from for you? Where did that idea come from? And what's your aim with assisting people and organizations through that work?
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity to do that. So I'm in the 27th year of my practice, which feels ridiculously long to me. And yet I feel like when I look back, about every 4 years-ish, I kind of blow the thing up and start again. There's this reinvention that happens. And I don't know for sure if all of my clients would notice that, but certainly often that's a mindset shift for me, or it's a sharpening of some messaging, or, a shift toward things. And so where I'm sitting right now with it is that the bulk of my work has always focused on facilitation of group processes to lead to a new strategy. So I'm really a strategist at heart who loves working with groups. And I understand the benefit of collaborative strategy building because I think that it builds buy-in and also reduces blind spots and has some educational value for people as well. So in the context of that, I help people reimagine their next chapter. And the way that has evolved has two parts for me. One is the emphasis on imagination, because I would say that most of my career, strategy has really been about rear view mirror tools, looking back on what we've done before, what has worked in the past, what's on our CV from our past lives, whatever, and expecting therefore that we can kind of extrapolate that into the future. And realizing from a lot of my conversations with groups, also, as we look into the future, we might use the same words to describe that future, but the picture we have in our heads is different than one another. And if we don't give people containers or opportunities to have the conversations to say, tell me what you're picturing so we can check if it's aligned, then we miss something. And also, if people don't have that opportunity, sometimes we can kind of sketch a future image that is really vague. And we know that something that is more specific is more likely to happen. And so that's where the imagination piece came from for me, in addition to going, why is imagination seen as something kids do, not something adults do? Because our imaginations are actually richer as adults. A lot of people think that's a kid thing, but there's all kinds of evidence as to why adults are better at imagining than kids are. So I'm happy to delve into that. So that was one piece. The other piece came from working primarily with organizations. I work largely with nonprofits and charities and universities, health organizations, local governments. And so single organization strategy is really the bulk of my work. But what's happened is I've gone both sort of higher level and lower level from that in an altitude point of view, working with organizations at multiple scales, maybe across a system or across a community, where they say, I can't lead alone. I have to lead with other leaders in my space in order to tackle the challenges that we need to address. So that's where the multi-sector planning has come from. And then also those same leaders in those organizations started to call me to work one-on-one. And so I'm doing a lot of coaching one-on-one with CEOs, board chairs, people like that, who are in transition. So I'm a transitions coach and helping them reimagine quite intentionally their next chapter, maybe as they transition out of their current role, or maybe as other big life disruptions have come their way, either by choice or circumstance, that they need some company to just help navigate that next chapter. So that's where things have kind of landed in the current iteration of the work.
Yeah, I love that emphasis on imagination that you talked about. And when I'm working with different leaders and organizations, often, as you say, there's that focus on strategy because it's the right thing to do. We've got all the frameworks and the tools that tell us that we need to be strategic. But it does tend to follow a cookie cutter approach, doesn't it? Like, you do the different types of you use the different types of frameworks and analysis tools, etc. When you're working with people to try and get them to engage in imagination and play, how do you get them to connect in with that part of their brain which may have been switched off since they were a kid? Like, what are the things that you do specifically with them?
It's true. First of all, it's bringing it to people's awareness, right? And I think I tend to kind of catch people off guard a little bit, I think, because I'm into imagination, but I am a strategist, right? I'm not the person coming and doing, you know, juggling or an improv comedy act or showing up in a costume or something. I don't have that sort of vibe at all. And so I think they kind of go, oh, like this doesn't seem maybe as woo woo or as childlike as I was expecting. And yet, right? So I tend to use pretty structured processes to help people tap in because, as you said, it's a really underused skill. And we have to, I believe some of the imagination questions are actually really hard for us to answer because we're quite rusty, right? And so, even something as simple as what do you want? Like, what do you really want? Or what are you going after? Or in the sectors where I work, the win, like the actual success is really hard to define if people haven't had an opportunity to talk about it. So if I'm working with private sector clients, they pretty much know that it's something to do with, stakeholder or shareholder value or profitability or market share, something like that. Whereas in the community spaces where I work, the wins are a little harder to define and we have to spend some time talking about that. So part of my work is helping people imagine a day where they've been really successful. Like what has their win look like? And that's where we actually start to see that people's vision of that desired future diverges quite a bit. So I can give you one example. If I'm working in food insecurity, say I run a food cupboard or food bank or something, I have said to a board, what's your key metric? And they would agree to say, we want to know usage numbers, right? We want to know how many people are accessing our services. Great. Then I said, do you want that number to go up or down? 5 years from now, things have gone really well. Do you want that number really high or really low? And literally the group was split in half on that. Because, and you can see why, half the group is saying, we want lots of people using our services and aware of them and taking advantage of what we have to offer. Great. And the other half was saying, hang on, we are about addressing hunger and we don't want people needing our services. And so if we're trying to work ourselves out of a job, I want fewer people using our food cupboard. Also legitimate. So, but it wasn't until that moment where they kind of looked across the table at each other and went, oh, our key metric, when we see it in a report to the board, some of us think this is good news and some of us think this is good news. And that's a problem. So part of it is imagining a future together where you actually go, how do our current performance indicators and things help us get toward that desired future? Do they? And so it's not so much pulling out the kids' toys as much as it is saying, describe to me what you really hope happens. And does that match what your colleague is saying? And if so, what could we do? And so a lot of the questions are, what if we, or how might we? It's that kind of idea. And I think it's the learning from it that is as important as the actual goal setting to say, yes, we're going to follow that exact path. It's much more going, oh, I had never really thought of it that way. And so it's kind of this awareness building that I think is a big part of strategy development that I really appreciate.
As I hear your insights around that, it reminds me of almost this connection to possibility, but to be able to even think about what is possible, it does require this going outside of the norm with what we normally think, and then imagining it and going, well, could I connect into that? It's often what I'll describe as the visioning process. So if I can envisage it, and it's not the laws of attraction stuff is the woo woo stuff for me, which I think is harder for people to understand, because that's one of my friends always says, hope is not a plan. I know that that's not her original quote, but I always attribute to her because she always says it. And it's true. Like, we can't sit here and cross our fingers and hope, but if we can envisage it, then our brain can almost map out a path for how do we get there? And then all of a sudden it becomes possible. Right. So, and even through that process, I'm sure many of the teams you work with go, yeah, we envisage this, but it's not possible, or it's not aligned to what our strategy is or what our vision is and what we want to do. So I love what you're saying there, because I think I see it that it would immensely help people just to get that connection around what is possible.
I think it really does. And I think when people think about vision, their brains go to vision statement. They think about crafting a sentence that's going to go on a wall of their cubicle or something. And that's not really what I mean. And so it is that, like, eventually, maybe that would find its way into their vision for the future. But I think because we've been so conditioned to write strategies or write those identity statements like mission, vision, values, that kind of stuff, we actually haven't taken a lot of time to go, no, what do you hope the future for this organization actually looks like? And you mentioned hope, and there's actually really cool science around hope where I kind of go, it is a strategy in the sense that there's three components to hope. And one is that you can believe that the future can be better than the current state. So it does have that optimistic quality. But the other two parts are that you can see pathways to get from where you are now to that future state. And also you have the agency or motivation or resources to keep moving along that path. And so in that sense, I feel like strategy development is a bit of that, of saying, where are we trying to get to? And what pathways, multiple plural pathways, could we take? So there's mental flexibility there. And we're clear on kind of what's fixed and what's flexible. And then also, are we going to be able to move toward that? There's something roadmap-y about hope that actually does make it feel quite strategic to me. And the interesting thing for me is that the word strategic is so overused, and a lot of people are like, I don't know if something is like, what makes something strategic? And for me, that's kind of high altitude, multi-year, full organization, and smart. And the more I'm learning about hope, the more I'm realizing that fits really nicely with strategy in a way that I think, similarly to imagination, we have relegated it to kind of unicorns and rainbows and stuff, but it's actually really practical. And not only that, it's actually the number one contributor to us being adaptable is our hope score, which I think is also cool.
Oh, I want to ask you a little bit more about adaptability, but that is, well, there you go. Maybe my girlfriend says, when she says hope is not a plan, maybe I could say, yeah, it is actually a big part. Rebecca said, I think when we look at hope that way around, you said, we believe the future can be better. We see the pathways, and there's that, we have the choice of the agency, you said, and the resources to help move it through. I think there's conviction baked in that, because it's almost that belief that I can see a way through this. I hope that it eventuates, or, we might not use it in that context, but the conviction underlying it is there is a path here, and I've got to work out maybe my how, but I know that I can do it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's so important that you and I both have talked about, being inspired by the company we.
Mm.
And I think part of what that looks like, both organizationally and personally, is a combination of other people who can show us what is possible when we didn't even know something was a thing, and also who can hold that belief for us when our belief is low, right? So, but I think the first part is actually even more important because we know that our own kind of motivation and mojo comes and goes. But if you've never even thought something was possible, it's very hard to imagine that into existence. So, for example, our curiosity is a function of what we've been exposed to. So, if I have never heard of Paris, I am not going to wonder what Paris was like because I don't know it's a place. And same thing, if I have never thought that it was possible to do something or never seen anybody that did that, I'm very unlikely to just imagine it out of nowhere. A lot of our imagination is actually anchored in memory and it's anchored in what we already know. And it's an extension of that. And so that's why it's just so important that we are exposed to a wide variety of people and experiences and possibilities, because the more sort of diverse exposure we have, the more likely we are both to be curious and imaginative. So I think even as organizations, we need to kind of lift our gaze a bit and look out and around to see not just what our immediate competitors are doing, but to be really like broad gauged people. So a woman named Dory Clark that writes about, she has a book called The Long Game. And in it, she talks about optimizing for interesting, right? And I love that. I want to be somebody in my individual life and in organizations I work with who optimize for interesting, because I'm starting to see how that links to a whole bunch of other really helpful skills in an organization.
Wonderful. So look that one up too. I love Dory Clark's work. I know she's featured quite a bit in a number of her articles go into the Harvard Business Review.
Yeah.
So my question, as I'm thinking and pondering what you're saying, I'm thinking, can everyone do this? Like organizations and individuals, do they need a specific set of capabilities or a particular mindset that enables them to reimagine more than others? What's your experience around it?
Mm. I don't know if this is accurate, but the metaphor I think of is like a muscle where if you haven't strengthened it and haven't used it forever, you're going to feel like you can't do something, but you can do it. It just is going to take a lot of reps, right? It's a lot of repetition and you're going to have to be really patient. Whereas if it's something that you have been accessing regularly, repeatedly, it's going to be easier for you. So I think that's one piece. I think another piece, you mentioned mindset. I mean, the classic Carol Dweck kind of growth and fixed mindset stuff, I think that's also very important. And I think one of the drawbacks, I think, of her traditional work, which has been extended by her and by others since she first wrote that book, but is that I think by definition, somebody that's struggling with a fixed mindset, either collectively or individually, isn't even going to think a growth mindset is a thing, right? Like by definition, fixed mindset people say, there is no better future, or I can't learn that, or I'm really not good at that, or I don't have a good imagination, right? And so part of the challenge is to help people who are feeling a sense of fixedness or scarcity move into the possibility that the future could be better before they can even start articulating what that desired future could be like. Because you're not going to start, crafting a really detailed image of it if you don't even believe that that's a thing. Like, and there are people who are tempted to put kind of the achievability of something into the equation too soon. So when I'm working on strategy with people, I will say, set the achievability aside for the moment, not because I want you operating in some, la la land that's not practical. It's not that. It's that if you decide that something is compelling enough, is inspiring enough, is exciting enough for you, you're going to find the resources and the pathways to get to it. So I don't want you to shut those doors too soon and say, oh, we can't do that. We don't know how to do that. We don't have the resources for it. I want you to fall in love with the vision first. And then, like, there's going to be a bunch of stuff you don't want to do anymore. And maybe that'll free up some resources to make this new pathway possible for you. So it's not about ignoring capacity issues or resource issues. It's about the timing when we bring that in. And I want to bring that in near the end of a strategy process, not at the beginning.
Yeah. It would be, I imagine it would be, and my experience in working with other teams is quite limiting. If we're thinking from the outset, we've been talking about possibility and imagination and creativity and visioning. And if we're thinking from the outset, well, what are my chances? With everything you know about the resources that are available to you at that time, it's limiting because you're like, "Nah, we can't do it." maybe we don't have the money right now. Maybe we don't have the right level of capability. Maybe we don't have the right opportunities, or we're not ready to hit that, frontier in the market. But it's quite limiting. It makes me think of just an organization staying very small. And as you say, not looking up and looking out.
Yeah. And I think the way I picture it is, if you've got sort of a pie that's a certain size and you're slicing it up and you start thinking of other things to do, if you have to slice that pie into more slices, the slices get smaller, right? So there's kind of a built-in scarcity mentality around that. And a lot of organizations are adding things to their strategies or, just are straight like, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. And they're not either removing things because sometimes unlearning something is as important as learning. And so that's another key to adaptability. But they're also maybe not thinking about the fact that this pie could be bigger or we could have a second pie. And so sometimes the imagination just takes a bit of unlocking like that. So I'm not asking them to, I don't know, come together and like make a pie. I'm just saying, like, imagine if your pie were actually larger so that when you cut it into more slices, the slices are bigger rather than smaller. Is that even possible? And then that can just sometimes that well-placed question is all they need to go, "Oh, okay, hang on. That takes me down a few other trails that I'm willing to follow for a few more steps."
Yeah. Rebecca, I wanted to revisit because you mentioned earlier on in relation to adaptability when we were talking about hope, and you said, no, there is some good stuff around hope and the fact that some science and research behind it. You mentioned a hope score. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And also, you just mentioned unlearning. I'd love to delve into a little bit more about this adaptability space and how you assist organizations in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. Where that comes in for me on a strategy level is helping people figure out how to stay responsive and adaptable while still having some things that are fixed enough that it gives them some guidance because you don't want to have everything moving all at the same time, right? So I'm interested in it from a responsive strategy point of view. That was my initial way in. And I wrote a book in 2019 called Nimble that was really about facilitating in a nimble way in a room, but who knew that the world was going to, turn upside down 6 months later, such that my whole practice really became about being nimble and responsive. So I was really interested when I came across a relatively new assessment tool. It's called AQAI, and it measures the adaptability quotient or the adaptability intelligence of individuals and groups. And what it does is it says, first of all, that for this particular assessment, there are 15 contributors to adaptability that are very well researched, good solid evidence there. And you're right, hope and unlearning are two of them. There are 15. And so you can imagine combining 15 elements in almost an infinite number of ways. What it does is it measures not just how adaptable are you, it's more about what's your preferred pathway to adaptability because we don't have a choice about adapting. So you're either going to do it, kicking and screaming, or you're going to do it willingly, but you're going to do it. And so if you are someone who is kind of in the camp of, oh, there's like so much change going on, and I'm just kind of keeping my head down until things go back to normal, I think you're going to be disappointed. Whereas if you're somebody that's like, well, things are changing all the time, we are living in a very dynamic, volatile environment. I need to figure out a way to kind of surf that wave rather than waiting for the waves to stop. You're going to be really interested in what your easiest pathway to adaptability is. And so if I have a really strong score in hope, I'm going to follow that hope driven pathway to that future that we're looking for. Whereas you might have a really good ability to unlearn things and to be really mentally flexible. And, you can see that there's lots of different ways to solve a problem. That might be your preferred way. And someone else on your team might be using their grit or their resilience to get toward adaptability. So if we can measure that individually and collectively, then teams can start to say, okay, collectively, here's our preferred path to adaptability. And one of the things I really like about the tool, I'm not usually an assessment person. It's not like I have a, suitcase of them and I pick out the right one. This is the only one I use. But I like it because this particular one includes your environment in your own score. So you know how sometimes you do one of these tests and you do it individually and then they put all the scores together at the end and say, this is what your team is like. This one actually asks about both your team and your corporate environment inside the assessment itself, because our environments help us be more or less adaptable too. So if I have really strong team support or really strong corporate creativity and risk tolerance, I'm going to be personally more adaptable than if I'm in the most boring, risk averse, beige, low ceiling, fluorescent lights kind of place. That environment and my team actually affect my personal adaptability. So that's why I like that particular tool. And I like the fact that people that score highly in their adaptability quotient, it's not that they're more adaptable, it's that they're more aligned with their preferences. And when you think about deliberate leadership that you work in, that sense of deliberately choosing our path to adaptability really appeals to me.
Yeah. And I love it. I mean, with the so many tests and quizzes and assessments that are available to us, what I love about this one that you're talking about is it's not whether the person's adaptable or not, and it's not whether they're this personality or that personality. It's actually around their preference around adaptability. I love that it actually measures the environment, because that is so right. It makes me think, why don't we include that in all of them? Because a person's environment will often heavily influence, it can influence working styles, communication, their willingness to even go into this imagining something new, strategizing, visioning, is what we've been talking about. If you're in an organization where that, as you say, risk tolerance low, we've always done it this way, quite traditional, it may inadvertently show that you're not very adaptable, but it might actually not be you from what you're saying. I'm hearing that it actually might be that environment's creating. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Um,
exactly it. And really, can I just
yeah.
interrupt there, Rita, if you don't mind? But I see it really. You asked me about specific practical ways that I help groups tap into their imagination. One really practical way, kind of in the room, is to pick a different room. Like even the physical environment where we meet. If you're meeting in the same boring meeting room that you have every meeting in because your department has one meeting space and every single meeting is in there, and you put people in there and go, okay, today's the day to be super creative. And then you go, well, we really didn't come up with anything all that new. One really simple variable is to just work somewhere else, like find a different location, because I'm a really big believer that the setting influences the session. And so you don't have to, travel halfway around the world to get that. You can literally just put people in a slightly different physical environment. And it's why companies like Google or other ones like that, they've invested a lot, even during and post COVID, in the physical surroundings that people work in. Some of it's a little creepy because I think part of it is like a casino where they don't ever want you to know what time it is or to leave. But some of it is super fun, right? Because like there's a tech accelerator near where I live, and they have playground equipment for adults in their building, like slides and swings and stuff, because they know that it infuses something as compared to working in a really boring space.
Yeah, gosh. And that, I will often try and do things differently just to change it up. This is going to sound really dumb, but even when I am hanging washing out on the line, like we have a traditional way, not we as in family, but I kind of tend to go left to right on one side. But occasionally, just to change things up, I'll just go on the other side. It's such a dumb thing, but I think, or even going on a different walking path, or choosing to do something different. It's really changing the order in which you're doing things. And I think even if we could just embed that into our daily practices, as silly or as trivial as what they may be, taking a different route to work, or, packing something different, rather than having the same thing for all the meals that you're having, it does just freshen it up, I think. And I don't know, does it? I mean, from your perspective, you'll know more about this from the research, but
No, it
my
absolutely does.
naivety around this is, well, if I'm choosing to engage in a different practice around even daily trivial stuff, then surely that will help me be a bit more expansive in my thinking.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really do. And there is good sort of neuroscience evidence around that. And it's even things like, I mean, we probably have all done it. As you said, you take a different walk. So those of us, I have a dog. We walk our dog every morning. If I go for a walk, if we do a circle and I go the other way around the circle, I notice different things, right? There's houses that I'm like, I could swear that house was not there yesterday because I've walked in front of it 100 times and never noticed it, right? And so it is both literally and symbolically a change in perspective, right? And we see things differently and we see what we're looking for, right? And so I think that's, there's a lot of basis for what you're saying. Plus, I think it's just more fun.
Isn't it just? It might confuse some people, like, where is such thing if you're put in a different spot. But other than that, might be even fun to watch that if I feel like
Yeah.
a laugh, a little like cheeky laugh. Rebecca, I get the question a lot from people in the leadership programs that I run around whether careers should be strategically planned or whether it should just be, I'm just going to do great work and wait for those opportunities to come. Now, people say, and they swear by their method, whatever their method is. And there are some people that really believe if I'm just putting my head down and my bum up and doing great stuff, people will notice, I'll get tapped, and therefore opportunities will come. I'm of the viewpoint where strategic planning helps us to unlock new opportunities. And so that's why I really love your work around reimagining, because it is very deliberate in nature and it's aligned absolutely to my philosophy around particularly leadership. What's your school of thought around?
I'm more of a fan of planning than not. I mean, I've made my life doing strategy work. I guess that's not a surprising answer. So I'm a fan of being proactive. And part of this imagination interest of mine comes from a belief that the future isn't just handed to us, but that we actually have a hand in shaping it and creating it. And so to the extent that we imagine what we want it to be like, we also then notice, it's like we see what we're looking for, right? We notice opportunities for things to bend toward that desired future. So if we've taken a minute to go, I want to end up in this role or this job or this type of work or field, whatever, likely the likelihood is very high that you're then going to see opportunities where you could move toward that, or training opportunities where you could build skills in that way, or it comes up in conversation and therefore somebody hears you go, oh, you're interested in that, I have an opening coming up in that, or whatever. And so I think I'm just a fan of, when your work talks about being deliberate about things like that, I think starting with some sort of end in mind, but also being responsive to the opportunity. So it is kind of a both and, because there may be an amazing career opportunity that presents itself that was not part of my script at all. And I want to be open to that. And so the way to talk about it in that Nimble book is some of us prefer to be really improvisational and spontaneous, and others of us are highly orchestrated, right? And you kind of know who you are. And if you can't tell, it's how you plan a vacation, right? The vacation people that have it all planned out ahead of time, they know if they go to Disney and they time their route and get a fast pass for specific things so they don't have to stand in line for more than 3 minutes, and they get it all worked out. Those are the orchestrated people. If you ask the improvisational people what it feels like to be led or facilitated by an orchestrated person, they're going to tell you they hate it, that it feels stifling and that there's no room for them to be spontaneous or creative. And similarly, the reverse is also true. So our happy place is not everybody's happy place. But if we can kind of combine that combination of planning things out and sort of being spontaneous in the moment, but knowing ourselves well enough. So if you're somebody that tends to really script things like, I want that job and every role I take is leading me to that job, when something goes off script, you're going to lose your mind, right? So you're the kind of person, if that's you, that needs to kind of loosen your grip on your script. But if you're a really highly improvisational wing it kind of person that shows up in Florida and goes, so what do you want to do?
Yeah.
You probably need a bit of a script, right? Because you might find yourself, oh, how did I get here? So I feel like it's a both and, depending on our starting place and preference.
Yeah. Good answer. So therefore, we're not offending anyone that wants to do either. And I think it's what's worked, but also given our conversation around adaptability too, it's about trying some new stuff and seeing whether that yields a different response with some of this.
Yeah. I think as I get to a certain age too, I'm thinking you have this sense, I don't want to operate out of a scarcity mentality, but at the same time, I am becoming more conscious of not having that many turns left, right? And if I have left everything to chance, there's a whole bunch of things that I hope I still get a chance to do in my life. And I need to be intentional about making those happen now.
Yeah.
And, I think about the question of, if, if, if I don't, it's not a regretful thing, but it's more like, what chapters of my life have I not yet written or not yet lived into that I would regret not having done if I didn't get a chance to do them, right? And so I think there's an element of that too, saying, if you have some things that you want and opportunities that you'd like to take advantage of in your life, giddy up, right? Like,
Yeah.
go ahead and do that. And that does actually take some deliberate planning and meeting the right people and, whatever the skills are that you need to do that. And so I just haven't been willing to leave that to chance because it just feels high stakes to me. It feels too important.
Yeah. I think too, I mean, yes, being deliberate, whether it's with our own, what I call your personal strategic plan, which feeds into this conversation and career, or whether it's, being very deliberate and intentional with your team or with your organizational strategy, there's risk in because the minute you set a path to be deliberate, you are setting expectations, like you're putting things out there, which may or may not eventuate. And sometimes I think it's interesting to hear you say that for you, that reverse is, well, if I'm leaving it to chance, it's high stakes, what am I missing out on? I think equally, some people look at it and go, well, if I say that I'm going to do something, if I put that goal out there, then, oh, what happens if I don't achieve it? So there's that whole fear around, not achieving it, shame, embarrassment, all that kind of stuff that can come with it too.
It's interesting you say that. I was listening to another podcast just today with Malcolm Gladwell and Adam Grant, and they were talking about that self-sabotaging technique of, if I'm concerned I'm going to fail, then I set out and make sure I fail so that, like I can blame it on not having studied for the test or whatever. But also in Seth Godin's new book on strategy, actually, he talks about the fact that if we make a strategy of any kind, we're on the hook for it, right? We're on the hook for if it happens, and we're on the hook for if it doesn't happen, right? And so some people just avoid making any kind of set of priorities because they don't want to be on the hook for what they've said and whether it happens or it doesn't, right? So, yeah, there's an interesting accountability piece both to ourselves and to people around us if we are willing to make our goals visible.
Yeah. And then that comes back to trust in self and also success
Mm.
metrics. Because if you've had a goal, like if you've set your mind intentionally to get something done, again, whether it's individual strategy or your team strategy or organizationally, and you've had a go, but it didn't happen, it's always like, what's worse? Is it worse that you had a go and it didn't happen? Or is it actually worse that you never even dreamed large enough or even thought it possible, so you didn't start? And I think that very much comes down to our own level of risk tolerance, but also reputation, accountability, how much we want to be kept on the hook for that thing.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
Rebecca, I want to finish off with you around the deliberate leader and, in particular, characteristics and qualities that you observe in people that you would categorize as fitting into that deliberate leadership category. And I guess it's kind of tied up in if you had some words of wisdom or tips, what would it be for people that are wanting to really embrace more of this deliberate leader mindset?
Mm, appreciate that question. I wrote a book last year called Elastic, and one of the pieces of that book, the word elastic is an acronym of 7 different leadership qualities that I feel are underrepresented in the leaders that I work with that I love working with. So that's where I started, was to look at some of the leaders that I most admire and say, what is it that makes them awesome? And I won't go through all 7 right now, but the E stands for energy. And I feel like recognizing energy as a currency that is really important, both as a gauge of how we're doing. So, how's our mojo? But also as a way to gauge how our team is doing. That if you notice somebody's energy is really low, what's that a proxy for? And I think there's something about paying attention to the important currency of energy as a signal for other things. And so that would be one area. I
Mm.
think another area that I'm noticing more and more is the area of curiosity. And I mentioned it earlier, but I think, if I say to people how important it is to lead with curiosity, nobody's going to disagree with me, but lots of people say they do it, but they don't demonstrate they're doing it. So we can be curious internally, but leaders who lead with curiosity on purpose, they ask questions even when we're talking about something that they probably have some expertise or some opinions on. And I really appreciate people whose default is to inquire and ask and listen. And I guess finally, I would say that I think a number of the qualities of leaders that are often seen as individual qualities, I see them as collective qualities. So imagination is better together, curiosity better together, energy comes from being together. So I'm a big fan of collaborative leadership, not because every decision has to be a group decision. I don't mean that. But I think a number of the activities that we think of as being things we do alone or in our own heads, when we do them out loud and with others, they are amplified in their clarity and in their impact in ways that we just can't do if we're sitting sort of noodling them alone, you know?
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love what you said there about imagination, curiosity, and energy almost better. I mean, particularly imagination, curiosity better together. That energy is derived from our, I guess, our experiences together and how we're making each other feel in the moment. So, yeah, I love that. And I think it's leaders often will say to me, it feels quite lonely. And I think that's a really nice reflection that can take out that sting of loneliness because you're not shouldering all of it on your own. And in fact, getting together with your team and particularly off the back of what we've talked about around strategizing maybe a little bit differently, engaging in imagination. You don't have to be shouldering all of that, yourself. And it's utilizing the cognitive diversity in the team for an even better outcome.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I often think of the example of going back to the kids with imagination, right? If you're dressed up in a costume and you're 4 years old and you're pretending you're Darth Vader or something, that's great. But if your friends show up and somebody else is dressed as Princess Leia and Chewbacca arrives at the door and all of a sudden you've got stormtroopers in the backyard coming to play, so much better, right? And the game just got way more interesting. And I don't think adults are that different, right? I think, we want more people in the game that can, that we can riff off of. And we know, as you mentioned, I mean, diverse teams have the potential to be the strongest of teams. And we don't know a ton yet about why. We have some inklings of that. But I think one of the elements, I mean, there's all kinds we could talk about, but I think one of them is that there's something about collectively imagining something together where people bring perspectives you never would have thought of. And if you're willing to stay curious longer and find out how their contribution could contribute to the picture in your head and yours to theirs, I think it unlocks possibilities that we just wouldn't in a million years dream of on our own.
Yeah, you mentioned collaborative leadership before, and it's the ultimate collaboration because when I do work with teams in conflict and they go, oh no, it's okay if we've kind of gotten to the point where we've compromised. But to collaborate is to take it that bit further where my idea and your original idea actually doesn't even matter. It's what we've both come up with in our discussions and in our interactions that have made the genesis of those two ideas quite different. And so that to me is that ultimate collaboration that we suspend ego and we suspend the fact that I'm the leader. I need to set the vision and come up with the idea. It's actually that your idea has an opportunity to grow and become even stronger and better because you've shared it and you've allowed it to breathe and you've allowed it to be played with and you're doing it together with other people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I
And
completely agree.
it's a lovely way. And all I've got in my mind at the moment is little kids all dressed up in little Star Wars costumes. How cute, right? Because you're absolutely right. And then also the classic Bridget Jones diary scene where she dresses up in costume because she's been told to dress up in costume and no one does, which is often, as adults, that's pretty awkward. But we hope that we've got others that are willing to come on board. Hey, Rebecca, thank you so much for our conversation today. It's been a real delight to go into lots of different directions with you, and I've got so much out of it. So thank you very, very much, Dr. Rebecca Sutherns, for being on the Deliberate Leader podcast.
I appreciate the opportunity, Rita. Thanks so much.
You've just listened to the Deliberate Leader podcast with Dr. Rebecca Sutherns, and what a great conversation. We talked a lot about imagination and how, as adults, we can really bring imagination and play into the work of leadership development, team development, and strategic development. Rebecca gave us some really good insights into how we can engage with play, even as adults. And even though we might leave that kind of imaginary piece behind when we leave childhood, which is unfortunate, we talked about risk tolerances and risk appetite for imagination and curiosity in particular. And Rebecca then also shared some information on the adaptability quotient, which really looks at not so much whether you're adaptable as a person or a leader, but really your preferences around adaptability. It was a great discussion with Rebecca, and I'm sure that if you've tuned in already, you'll also have enjoyed it. Otherwise, tune in. Talk to you soon.